WTOT, I'm Robin Vincent. The fight over an oil tunnel beneath the Straits of Mackinac reaches the governor's doorstep today. At 1 p.m., outside the George W. Romney building in Lansing, tribal and environmental advocates will urge Governor Gretchen Whitmer to reject Enbridge's Line 5 tunnel. Inside that building, the governor meets with leaders at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE. Through Friday, the agency is taking public comment on the wetlands and Great Lakes bottomlands permits that are tied to the project. Now, Enbridge Energy says a concrete-lined tunnel deep under the lakebed would cut spill risk and keep energy reliable. Tribal and environmental advocates say construction would damage wetlands, lock in decades more oil, and conflict with treaty-protected waters. Today, we're joined by Sean McBrearty. He's the Michigan Director for Clean Water Action and campaign coordinator with Oil and Water Don't Mix. That's one of today's organizers. He's here to spell out the coalition's specific request of the governor and EGLE and the evidence behind their concerns. Sean, welcome back to the Metro.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Robin.
So before Friday's deadline, what exactly do you want Governor Whitmer and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to do?
Well, right now they are considering permitting for what would be, if this oil tunnel is ever built, this would be the most highly pressurized tunnel in the history of the world. 17 bar pressure is what they're planning to find while they're drilling the tunnel, which 5 bar pressure will kill you. It's the pressure of 17 atmospheres crushing down on a person. And they're doing this and then putting an oil and gas pipeline that's essentially going to run 23 million gallons of explosives through the Straits of Mackinac every day. And this is absolutely unacceptable. And then on top of this, so through the permitting reviews so far, there is not one agency at the state or federal level that has examined the environmental impacts of digging a tunnel underneath and through the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. And we've argued since 2020 that if EGLE does not look at the environmental impacts of tunneling through the Great Lakes bottomlands, nobody will. Because EGLE is the agency through the Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act that has the authority to decide whether or not that's a good idea. And we are alarmed because what we're seeing right now is EGLE is only planning on looking at the north and south shore of the straits and a water intake system that will be built in the straits. They are not planning on actually looking at the environmental impacts of tunneling under a fifth of the world's fresh water.
Okay, EGLE is taking comments right now, though, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes,
so
they are.
So once comments close, and again, public comments, once those close, EGLE can approve, deny, or approve with tough conditions. Walk us through what each path would mean in, say, the next 60 to 90 days for construction, for oversight, and let's say pipeline operations, and which path can you live with and why?
The only path that our coalition can live with, and that is appropriate, is to deny Enbridge's requests for permits. Enbridge has not submitted enough evidence. They have not done enough studying to show that they can safely drill through the Great Lakes bottomlands. They did roughly 1/10 of the industry-recommended geotechnical research. And in that limited research, over half of the rock samples they found were rated between poor and very poor for drilling material. One of the foremost tunnel construction and engineering experts in the world has pointed out that this is literally the worst rock he's ever seen anybody consider drilling a tunnel through. And yet, as it stands right now, we're not going to get an environmental review of whether or not that's appropriate underneath the Great Lakes and underneath, by the way, an operating oil pipeline. This is a disaster waiting to happen.
Sean,
and so we're urging, yes.
Sorry, if I may jump in here,
Sorry.
just because, no, that's all right. We don't have a ton of time, and I do want to get to a few different points, one of which is Enbridge Energy says that its new oil tunnel would virtually eliminate spill risk in the Straits of Mackinac and keep UP propane and regional fuel steady. If the pipeline is operating today, if you all are not successful in getting it shut down, why not take that safety upgrade?
It is not a safety upgrade. We do not believe that's an accurate assessment. And also the large point here, and Enbridge's lawyers, by the way, agree with us on this point in court. Their PR experts say something else, but in court, their lawyers and experts agree that we don't actually need Line 5. Enbridge experts identified that if Line 5 were immediately shut down, so a worst-case scenario rupture of Line 5, the only impact we would see is a 0.5 cent rise in regional gas prices, and there would be no shortages. And that's because other routes are already available from the Alberta tar sands to Sarnia, Ontario, which is where this oil is going. So we don't actually need the pipeline. So we are going to be successful with shutting down the pipeline before a massive oil spill in the Great Lakes. And this tunnel is far from a safety upgrade. It's another huge risk.
Sean,
on top of, yes.
I want to, if we could for a moment, since we're talking about the Straits of Mackinac and alternative routes, I want to take listeners there to the Straits of Mackinac for a moment, if we could.
Yeah.
I want to think about the fast currents, the winter ice, the big ships, and how all of this makes response to accidents really tough there. So if we could, let's dive into that for a moment. Forgive the pun. What makes the Straits hard to protect, and what safeguards should be in place?
Yeah, so the Straits of Mackinac is a unique place in the world. As we all know in Michigan, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are actually one body of water, and they slosh back and forth at the Straits. So the current changes directions 180 degrees every 1 to 3 days on average. The peak flow of water through the Straits is 10 times the flow of water over Niagara Falls. This is a lot of water moving very quickly, and it's also a major lane for commerce. It's the foundation of the creation story for the Anishinaabe people. The Straits of Mackinac is so much to what it really means to be here in Michigan, and that's a big part of what we're risking with Enbridge here. Not to mention the fact that if they succeed in building this tunnel, the plan is for them to then hand over ownership to the state, which means that when there's an oil spill, it wouldn't be Enbridge on the hook. It would be the Michigan taxpayer.
This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Sean McBrearty. He's the campaign coordinator with Oil and Water Don't Mix. We're talking about the proposed Line 5 oil tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac and why activists are pushing back on the plan. I want to go back to something, Sean, that you mentioned that I think doesn't often get enough focus in this conversation. I know it does among folks that you work with, but when we zoom out, there's less talk about tribal sovereignty when it comes to this issue. Tribal treaties reserve rights to fish, hunt, and gather in these waters, and those rights are federal law. What does, quote unquote, honoring the treaties mean here, and why should it shape permit decisions?
Well, we have been so grateful for the partnership of all 12 federally recognized tribes here in Michigan who are united in opposing Line 5 and opposing the oil tunnel. And what recognizing their sovereignty means, from my perspective, is that we all have a duty. I am not an Indigenous person, but we all have a duty to recognize that the lands that we are here on are lands that were owned by the tribes. And when in the Treaty of Washington, for instance, which is relevant up in the Straits in 1836, the tribes ceded the land that we used to become a state in exchange for those hunting and fishing rights. And recognizing those hunting, fishing, and gathering rights means that our government actually has to bring them to the table, not as another stakeholder in the process, which is what all too often happens, but as unique rights holders who should get a say in the decision-making, not merely to be heard and glossed over, which is unfortunately what we've seen happen with the federal government. We are hopeful that the state government actually recognizes the sovereignty of our tribal partners and hears them out and works with the tribes, because in the end, what the facts are telling us is we do not need this oil tunnel. We do not need the existing pipeline. And saying no to Enbridge, the company responsible for the two largest inland oil spills in U.S. history, one of them right here in Michigan, is a great way that the state can show that they take the sovereignty of our indigenous people here seriously, and it can also show that they're standing up to protect the environment over the corporate interests of the oil industry.
Sean, sorry, only
Yes.
because, again, we're running out of time here. I want to shift more specifically to the environment, from plankton to whitefish to birds. Which species or seasons worry you most during construction?
There is not really one specific concern. There's so many of them. I think one major concern that's almost undisputed is that Enbridge will be releasing wastewater into the Straits of Mackinac. This wastewater will contain bentonite slurry, which is known to coat fish gills, has caused major fish kills in different places. And the Straits of Mackinac is the largest spawning grounds of the whitefish, who, are the tribal fishery is heavily reliant on whitefish. And that is one of the kind of hallmark species of the Great Lakes. So I think that is especially concerning. But the impacts from an oil spill, whether it happens during tunnel construction, after a tunnel is built, or before any of this from the existing pipeline, the impacts to the straits would be roughly the same. We'd see over 700 miles of shoreline covered in oil. We'd see Enbridge's subsidiaries going bankrupt and Michigan taxpayers left holding the bill. We'd see, an incident that would be difficult to imagine Lake Michigan and Lake Huron and our tourism economy ever recovering from.
I mean, it is.
So that's what we're pushing against.
Without question, you paint a devastating picture. And we're talking to you today because you're trying to push a decision from the governor who's meeting with EGLE. If you don't get a full denial, what single decision would still count as real progress for the lakes and for tribal rights? And what's your next move if you don't get it?
Well, if we don't get a denial right now, what I would consider a partial success would be EGLE requiring Enbridge to file all the paperwork so that EGLE can actually look at the environmental impacts of tunneling under the Great Lakes. And then I'm very confident we would get a denial, because the experts that have looked at this have said it's not a real plan. It's a very dangerous plan that risks our Great Lakes for more Enbridge profits.
Sean McBrearty is the campaign coordinator with Oil and Water Don't Mix, and he's Michigan Director for Clean Water Action. Sean, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
My pleasure, Robin. Thank you for having me.
And we should note Enbridge is a financial supporter of WDET. We have extended an invite to Enbridge to discuss this issue, and we will be extending that invite again. Coming up, delicious exotic mushrooms could be growing in a forest near you. That's the good news. The bad news? It could be the invasive golden oyster mushroom. How far has it spread, and what will it do to other mushrooms like morels? We'll find out more next. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll be right back after the news from NPR and WDET.